All right, forecast. Yes, if we dive into the dollar first, of course, then we are seeing the scenario that I actually had hoped for is that we have a nice daily fair value gap sitting right there. Now, at this moment in time, we have two areas that we can continue higher off of, and that is already the daily fair value gap in itself, or that is the overlapping part. At this moment, when I'm recording this, it's 1 hour ahead of a London session. I do quite like the idea of coming into the overlapping part first before continuing higher, since we're already inside the daily fair value gap, which means that London doesn't have the opportunity to only sting into the daily fair value gap and then already continue higher. No. So if we have the overlapping part right there, get our entry pattern, could be very nice. I'm definitely looking to get involved then. Now, if we do not respect this, and this is just equally as important, right, to avoid any losses that can simply be avoided, is that if we do not respect this high sitting right there and we already continue lower right there, then the same goes that I do not want to take any longs and I might actually consider again being bearish overall. So that is also very important. Then likely a new daily bearish fair value gap will be created as well. So it's very important to also realize that if we do not trade back into those lows right there at the end of the day, then that is very suspicious that we actually might already want to continue lower. So that's very important to understand. In the meantime, of course, we can look for a short on all the other instruments and longs on the dollar. Now, on the 4 hour here on ES, we did see we came into this 4 hour value gap right there. And like we mentioned, right, overall, we've been continuing lower. I do think we can also still look to continue lower right here on ES. And it's the same for NASDAQ right there. Where NASDAQ, like mentioned, it's just quite a bit stronger. There's not convincing bearish prices right here. So it's still a little bit of consolidation price action. And it really depends on what the dollar still wants to do. Because if the dollar still wants to continue higher, then yes, ES and NASDAQ might actually want to continue lower still. So here, it's very much the same as yesterday, making use of the 1 hour right there, where we actually had quite a nice sting to the order block to then continue lower. Quite interesting. So make use of the 1 hour, see what the fair value gaps are telling you, to then see, all right, where do we actually want to trade towards? Currently, I would argue that we are targeting this high right there, based on these fair value gaps. Now, that is for the London session. Would have to see what the actual New York AM session wants to do as well. YM, we are inside the weekly value gap, and to be honest, we have quite a nice rejection right there. So a first target could be this daily fair value gap right there. First easy target, that could be the higher time frame premium rate right now that we can on the 1 hour look to then target, and we can use that as our magnet and the 1 hour as our guide to actually trade towards it. If we create new fair value gaps higher, that could be a very nice target as well. Then on DAX, let's see on DAX right here. On DAX, we have a daily fair value gap potentially in the making lower as well. In the meantime, I'm not too thrilled to get involved in DAX. The only thing I would argue is this 4 hour value gap right there, with the lows overlapping to continue lower off that. But other than that, well, not too interesting in my opinion. Australian dollar, US dollar. Let's see. What are we doing right here? We have this daily fair value gap, and although I like it, my preference is always when we have reached those lows right there, and we also create daily fair value gaps lower. My preference is always to have fair value gaps exactly overlapping with the lows that we took, which in this case, this is quite a heavy retracement right there to then continue lower. Then we could argue that this almost becomes a sweep right there. So here it's, yeah, I do not specifically like it that much anymore. But again, if on the dollar, also the retracement is quite big towards the overlapping part, and this is definitely overall still quite interesting. So I'm going to keep it on the short list. Euro US dollar, where it's the same scenario as on on the dollar itself. We have this low sitting right there, and that is the low I would want to use ahead of a London session as well. I am personally not trading the London session, but if we have a nice setup, I am considering to take a swing trade and to let it run to that month fair value gap on the dollar right there if we get the right setup as well. So that's quite interesting. I do quite like this, and I prefer this actually over GU right now, where yesterday I preferred GU. And this is still nice, don't get me wrong. But clearly what we can see is the bearish intention here is just more visible, because on GU what we are seeing is quite a bullish candle right there, quite a heavy bullish candle. So the daily value gap is still interesting, but based on the strength of EU and GU, I would prefer EU right now. Then New Zealand dollar, US dollar, exact same thought process as on Australian dollar, US dollar, but this has not reached the lows yet right there. So this is still quite interesting to look for shorts off of. US dollar, Canadian dollar. Now we are, it's getting interesting. It's getting there. The only thing is, again, the reason why I don't have it on the list is simply because we are running into quite heavy resistance in the form of that weekly order block. So it could be that this then becomes a 50-50 area right there, and we do this, and then after we continue higher or continue lower. So I do not want to get involved right there, but based on the daily, it is quite nice, of course. US dollar CHF, let's see. Same scenario, same as USD Canadian dollar, where I do not want to get involved because we're running into quite some resistance. US dollar JPY. Now this again is definitely nice, and like we mentioned, right, since the previous week, I've been talking about this quite some time right now. In the previous week, we saw that US dollar was consolidating, and still USD JPY went higher, which means JPY is just very weak overall. So here, what we saw right there is, as well, we are not creating those nice daily value gaps that we can trade into the next candle to then continue higher off of that. No, we are already exploding higher, which means that on the 4 hour, this is definitely one of those scenarios where you can go into the 4 hour, potentially even the 1 hour if the setup is there, to already look to continue higher off of. We actually have a beautiful high right there to target as well, beautiful fake top to continue higher off that. So it's definitely very interesting. I do quite like it, and if we get a very nice setup, I might consider swing trading it to new highs right there as well, if the setup presents, of course. Now on silver, we are 15 hours away from creating a new daily value gap lower, so that's still quite some time. 4 hour, well, it's not that nice actually. I'd hope for a nice 4 hour value gap lower overlapping with some lows, but that's not the case. So here I don't want to do anything currently. Yes, bearish, definitely looking to target this low, but just not too clear right now what we can continue lower off of. Then on gold, that's a very similar situation, but if we go into the 4 hour, that could be the differentiator, and it is, because right there we have a 4 hour value gap overlapping with the lows, which is very nice to then continue lower off of that. So that's still very interesting. Bitcoin. The momentum is not there, and like I mentioned, very characteristic of Bitcoin. It's just consolidating, exploding in one single daily candle, then it's just consolidating again. So here it's just simply waiting again. I also don't want to do anything right there. Crude oil, still in the same scenario, and it's the exact same thing for, I say that, but Nifty is actually doing something where we create a very nice ST actually right there, which we can finally look to then potentially target those weekly fair value gaps that we have right there. Do we have a monthly fair value gap? Not yet. So that is very nice actually. Previous month's high sweep as well, daily ST. Wow, that's quite nice. Breaker right there to continue lower off of fair value gap, and breaker. Wow, that's quite nice price action actually. Quite nice. Targeting this weekly fair value gap sitting right there. And then on the short list, we all went over these, and I'm going to change the interest list though, because I am interested quite a lot in EU. I do have to be honest, with that low right there to then come into that to continue lower of that. It's quite interesting. GU is still very interesting. Australian dollar, US dollar, New Zealand dollar, US dollar a little bit less. Gold as well, quite interesting, but it's mainly off the 4 hour, and we are also in the midst of creating a daily value gap. So that is where I'm like, I do not really like that. I prefer just where we already have daily scenarios as well. Then on the long list, US dollar JPY, definitely as well interested, but the discount, the scenario when we are already exploding higher, the discount rate to find that we are, or the, where you can, how do I say that properly? the discount rate that we are continuing higher off of. And if you want to find that exact discount rate, is a little bit harder in a scenario where we are already exploding higher. Of course, when we are just before we are exploding higher, then it's easy because we can simply trade back into a VI gap. Right now, the discount rate is a little bit harder. So something to keep in mind. Canadian dollar JPY, which does not have news supporting ID, but does have news on Friday. And if we consolidate right there, what do we have on Friday? A nice daily VI gap to potentially continue higher off of. So that's also quite interesting for Friday, potentially. Euro, Australian dollar, which we are creating actually, whilst overtaking the weekly VI gap, creating actually quite a nice daily VI gap right there. So it could actually be quite interesting. Currently not going to add it to the long list, just still waiting. Euro, JPY, same exact scenario right there as Euro, Australian dollar. So here can be interesting on Friday. Euro, New Zealand dollar, let's see. And we reached the target right there. And this is where you could argue, right? Or if you compare it to Euro, JPY, Euro, Australian dollar, there's similarities, but it's not the same. And what I mean by that is this has not overtaken the weekly VI gap, not even close to it right there, where Euro JPY, Euro Australian dollar simply have. So again, there can be still a slight rejection that we get right there before we continue higher. So keep that in mind. It could be nice, but keep that in mind. GBP Canadian dollar. And this is definitely not nice enough for me to actually look for a trade actively. So I'm going to remove it from the waiting list. GBP New Zealand dollar. Let's see. Could also be nice on Friday because we are also creating that daily VI gap right there. Could be very nice on Friday as well. All right, that is what I'm looking at mainly. Yeah, mainly the EU looks very interesting.